In this panel, we are asking our 4 panelists to predict the future. And they've all thankfully, willingly come to do just that for us. So, if you knew what the stock price was going to be, you'd all go out and either buy it or sell it based on that knowledge. So, it's important for us to know where we're going. Sometimes it's easier to see, in retrospect, where that was that we were going to go. But there are some trends, and each of these gentlemen has some insight into this question. And so we're happy that they've agreed to come here and talk about these things. It's not just about trends. We have the topic. This is kind of a conjoining of 2 topics, the advanced persistent threat, or as Joshua Corman called it, the adaptive persistent adversary. So that's a good way to look at it as well. But these are 2 things that are difficult topics. But they're important things for us to keep in mind, to know about, to look at. And so each of these gentlemen will look at these things from their perspective. Going from left to right, we have Ben Anderson from Sandia National Labs. He's a senior member of the technical staff there. Then we have Dr. Kevin Roundy from Symantec, and Mark Brooks from MITRE Corporation, and then Dr. Mark Rogers, Purdue professor here in computer technology. So first remarks will be from Ben.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having me here. It's exciting. So I'm Ben Anderson. I'm at Sandia. Am I too loud? I feel like I'm loud. Okay. So half of my time at Sandia is spent with our information design assurance red team. So we actually get to be the bad guy, which very different mindset, can be very difficult at times. As hard as it is to defend, it's also really hard to be that, hopefully what we like to think we can actually impersonate a high-level attacker. So, what I want to talk about is we've seen over the last 2 days some models about specific adversaries and how they operate, what their goals are. So we actually have a different perspective with our red team, and we actually have what we call a generic threat matrix. So this slide just has one of our publications up here. You can find it on the web. Authored by David Dugan. So if you Google for this number here, you'll be able to find it. But one of the things that came out of the research is our generic threat matrix. So basically, instead of saying script kiddie, nation state, criminal organization, we just say there's a threat level from 1 to 8. Because if you say script kiddie, what do you mean? What are their capabilities? Do you mean someone who is a high school student or the average persistent teenager? Right? But the question is, okay, so where would you put anonymous? Are they a nation state? Are they cyber terrorists? Are they a criminal organization? It depends, right? So we take a view of it's a threat level 1 to 8. And we break them into various categories. So under a commitment level, we have intensity. So a high level of intensity means that someone is willing to die or be killed or kill someone to meet their goals. Medium, they might be okay getting arrested for something minor, but ideally they don't want to be arrested, but they're willing if things go wrong. And low, they're completely risk averse. They don't want to go to jail. They don't want to do anything. Sort of like, I want to have fun. I don't want to deal with any consequences. For stealth, high level means to accomplish their goals, they have to remain undetected for months to years. Medium, there might be some minor compromise allowed, but in general they want to fly under the radar. And low, it may not matter, right? If there's something like a smash and grab, a DDoS attack is a perfect example. They don't care if they're detected because it doesn't matter. You either weather the storm or you don't. Time, obviously, nation states or advanced criminal organizations, they plan months, years, sometimes even decades. If we look back at the Cold War, there were plenty of long-term operations. And again, goes all the way down to, at the level 8, we're talking days to weeks. Number of technical personnel is fairly self-explanatory. Then we have cyber knowledge versus kinetic knowledge. So cyber deals with essentially IT just in the vague blob sense. Kinetic, obviously, kinetic things. And access is, can they get access to the facility? So a high level there means they can get access. If a foreign intelligence agency wants physical access to your facility, they're going to get it. They may plant someone, 5 years later get them hired by the janitorial staff. They may bribe the janitorial staff. They may threaten the janitorial staff. They may get the FedEx guy to just bring an extra box. Whatever it is, they're going to get someone in the facility. Medium, they can probably get access to the facility. They might actually have to do break and entering. Standard break the window, get in. They know they have a couple minutes. And low would be, well, we might get access, we might not, we don't know, we can't guarantee it. It may just be someone left the door ajar while they brought out the trash, right? So that's sort of our generic threat matrix. And we like approaching it this way just because, again, if you say nation-state level adversary, what do you mean? If anonymous, where would they fit? So that's sort of a breakdown. And we did build this off of actual known incident data. So it does actually have some grounding in truth. But again, I'll point you to the SAND report number. So the couple other things about the advanced persistent threat. Yeah, I said it. So being a bad guy is really hard. It's sort of a dark art, like thinking like the bad guy or being a bad guy. You think, you don't even think that there is a box. So for example, if you wanted to get in this room, you don't think about the door. You're like, I wonder if the walls go all the way to the ceiling. I wonder if there's a tree outside the window. I wonder what the roof is like. Right? Can I impersonate someone? So none of that was cyber, but same thing is, well, can I get in the server room? Does the raised floor go outside their outer doors? What about the ceilings? How's their ventilation? Is the ventilation shaft big enough to crawl through? If they have a fairly secure facility, can I use a slingshot to send a USB stick, 100 yards into their facility? They might not plug a USB stick they find in the parking lot in their computer, but what about one they find, just outside the entry door? The other thing is the attackers are people. So in the Detecting Tic-Tac-Stego poster, which was a good poster, by the way. So one of the things they found was humans don't play tic-tac-toe perfectly. They get bored, distracted, rushed, they don't care, and they start making mistakes or not doing optimal moves, or they might play to block someone as opposed to going for the win. Because people make mistakes, they get tired, they get complacent, right? They're people. So that's one of the things the defenders can do, right? People do the same thing or similar things in the same way, or they reuse code. On the other side, they are people, which means they learn, adapt, imagine, create, persevere, and attempt to overcome, right? If you get the right person and they get a hard target, it just makes them want to take you down more. So they fight, they invent, they say, I need a tool, they come up with it. The catch being, going back to the first point, it's hard to do this, right? If you find a technology, you're like, this is a website that uses Ruby. I don't know Ruby. Now you have to go, not only learn it, but you have to learn it well enough to figure out where the holes are. Hugely time consuming. We're always in a fight with our red team, with management about how much training time we can get. It is hard, and it takes a lot of people to do a full press attack against a well-secured site. So the other thing is that, so we talked about it being professional now, right? So once upon a time, people would deface websites and put up their logo and go, look, I got street cred. Then someone realized you can monetize it, and now there's a lot more money to be made working for the bad guys than there are on the good guys. The catch is, if you're a good guy, you probably won't go to prison. Of course, the bad guys operating out of Russia, the same thing sort of holds true. But even though they're professional, they're going to make decisions based on, okay, what maximizes my profit? What is the best thing for me to do? How do I build my business? How do I get this malware to the most people? How do I take my resources and make more because I want that car? Again, they're also human. So if you can make them quit. They can be like, you know what, I give up. I've been poking at this thing for 2 months. I've made no headway. I'm going away. At the same time, so let's say you've blocked them for 2 months and then mock them. Now they might get mad. And again, now we go back to they're going to persevere, create, imagine, persevere and overcome. So that's another problem, right? So think about the human, I guess, is the point there. Then there's the whole economics issue, right? So an attacker is the product, right? So for a manufacturing facility, yeah, they have their IP, but security is on top of that. It's not, if they're building heavy equipment, they don't want their IP out there, but somehow they don't see that leak as actually part of the main line of their product. So security is an added expense that could be cut, reduced, eliminated, because if the other guy spends less on security, I can cut a little bit here, and we're probably still fine. But the attacker has the advantage of, I am the product. What I do is what we do. So they generally aren't going to get cut funding-wise. And then, so one of the things we're supposed to do is look at the future. So Spaff and I were talking a little bit yesterday, and the attackers are rational, but to a point. Again, they're human, right? So if you make them angry, they may be like, well, you know what? I have no need to go after Purdue University, but they piss me off, right? They made me mad, so even though it makes no sense, I am going to take down their website. Or I'm going to, launch a massive phishing campaign because I can, because I'm mad. However, just because they are rational or generally rational doesn't mean they all are. So if we take Snowden, what if Snowden had been working with the Chinese PLA in one of their cyber groups? What if he goes, man, I'm done with this, I hate this. I'm going to pull the trigger on every malware we have out there that I know about as I walk out the door. Forget picking up a whole bunch of classified material and taking it out and giving it to a newspaper. What if he goes, forget it, I'm hitting the button. Right? We spend millions making sure that people we put in our, in charge of our nuclear arsenal, that they're stable people, that they're not upset, that they're sort of calm, that they, they're patriotic, not necessarily super idealists. They don't have to hate communism. But we make sure that those people are psychologically acceptable. I haven't worked for any major criminal organizations, but I'm pretty sure they don't do that. So what happens when you have someone who, within a few seconds, can send the commands that are going to start taking down power grids, maybe blacking out a hospital, maybe just turning all the lights green in Manhattan. We have search engines that will find all the PLCs that are on the web. We can quickly find the PDFs that have the default passwords. We can find all of those with scripts. It's been done, right? We know it's been done. The research is there. It was 1 or 2 people working for a couple weeks to find that. So what if someone decides to use all that information and say, okay, shut everything down, and then walks out the door? Do I think is it possible? Yes. Do I hope it happens? No. But that's the thing, right? With individuals that have access to these kind of tools or arsenals, we have to watch out for them. And I think the important thing is not that we might not be able to stop them, but psychologically we have to be ready to go, okay, everything went bad. Let's figure out how we start picking up the pieces. Right? We can't go, what do you mean the power grid's down? All of it? And we just got to go, okay, power grid's down. Fortunately, we've thought about this. Let's start bringing it back up. So I don't know if that's the future. I hope it's not. But that's my doom and gloom. On the bright side, it is very hard to be a high-level attacker. It just takes a lot of time, a lot of smarts, and a lot of dedication. Cool.
Thank you. Thanks. Kevin, do you want to make your remarks?
Okay, hi everyone, I'm Kevin Roundy from Semantic Research Lab. And so I'll try and give you a little bit of my perspective as a researcher, what I think are some interesting areas. Oh, yeah, you're right. Okay, so I'm going to try and give you some of my perspective and the company's perspective, though I don't speak for the company, I speak for myself. So, and then also, since this is a research institution, I hope to give you some insight on where I think it's worth investing in future research and so that we can do a better job against zero-day attacks, targeted threats, these sorts of things. So, so Symantec is an interesting position because we're the world's largest security company. We protect about 300 million computers worldwide. And so, and we're on 100% of the Fortune 500s. 100% of the Fortune 500 are customers of ours, right? So this means that it kind of makes us in a minimum bar for attackers in some sense, right? So just like Josh was mentioning that, Metasploit is the minimum bar for the attackers, right? We are well, okay, no. If you can't defend against Metasploit, you can't defend against anyone. If you're an attacker and if you can't defeat semantic endpoint protection, you're not going to get into any major corporations, right? So, so it's an interesting game that we play, right? And we're in a different position than much of the rest of the security company with this product. So with much of the rest of the security industry with our product. So think, for example, so there's been some interesting developments, and you can see the same thing with Windows security settings, right? So from Windows XP to Windows 7, that was a quantum leap in terms of security. And to Windows 8 again, vast improvements in terms of security. Does that mean that they don't get compromised? No, they get compromised on a regular basis, right? And it's the same with semantic. So when we rolled out semantic endpoint protection version 12, we included vastly improved protections. We included file reputation technology and behavioral-based monitoring on the system. And so you could see some frantic conversations happening online between attackers saying, how do we get through this? This is way hard. It is really hard, but they learn, right? So it's not going to be a panacea. And so you're not going to find the silver bullet that just kills the attackers forever, obviously, right? Especially if you're in our position. And so, why did these things not necessarily help? I mean, there are some things that we deal with, right? We sell to all varieties of customers, and when I go out and talk to them, there's a huge variety of perspectives, right? You talk to government contractors, they're getting hit by targeted attackers all the time. They know it. They're even building their own solutions to protect themselves against these targeted attackers in many cases. They're collaborating with their peers in the industry. They're very well prepared. Then you talk to law firms, and sometimes they know they're getting attacked, but they just don't. They won't admit it. So they don't talk to their peers. They won't admit it to us directly, but they kind of, you can tell by reading between the lines without too much smarts that they've been attacked on many occasions. And then you have people who don't think they've ever been hit, but they're prime targets, right? So there's a huge variety of customers that we deal with that have various levels of awareness. And in the most cases, when you hear about these big breaches, some of them are semantic customers, but in most cases, when we go back and do an analysis, they took our products and they turned off all the best security protection features because occasionally it has about 0.1% of a false positive rate, right? And they don't want to deal with that. So they just turn it off, and it's just so much easier that way until the breach happens, and then it's too late. Now, would we have necessarily blocked the breach? I can't say that. It definitely would have been harder, right? They would have been better protected, and they would have likely had some advance notice. And another thing to keep in mind is that attackers can buy our product and reverse engineer it, right? So we see this happen, actually. We've observed malware authors actively taking their sample, running against our product. It got blocked. Run it, tweak it, run it again, tweak it, run it again. Keep going until they're just iterating, right? So when you think about some of these startups and some smaller companies that have a more targeted clientele, like CrowdStrike, like FireEye, like Mandiant, if I'm the bad guy, can I just become a CrowdStrike customer and then reverse engineer their product? You can't really do that, right? I mean, you don't sell it to just anybody. And all of the intelligence and analytics is happening in their infrastructure. So they're playing a very different game than we're playing in the scenario. And so, what does this mean for us? So I think what this means is that many of the things that other companies are doing, we're doing already, right? So when you think about the primary assumption that was mentioned this morning in our keynote by our CrowdStrike CEO, and this is the same assumption that's being used by most of these other companies, is that software engineers are lazy and attackers are software engineers and they reuse code. Now, if we were to suppose that we were to merge with one of these companies, take all of the telemetry that they have and put it into semantic endpoint protection and ship it out to 300 million computers, it wouldn't take that long for the bad guys to reverse engineer those features and eliminate those indicators, right? We have the same kinds of indicators in our product today, and they're not, they're catching a lot of stuff. We block targeted attacks all the time. That doesn't mean that we always prevent targeted attacks, right? So what can you do? So what can we do as Symantec? And where do we think that the industry can move forward? So I think one big thing is just looking for new paradigms. So let's say one paradigm that we recently adopted that I'll use as an example is spear phishing, right? So spear phishing comes in, it's essentially mail, right? And it's laced with some dangerous exploit that's going to damage your computer. So think if you were managing the mail for the President of the United States, he probably gets some dangerous mail, right? So it could be laced with ricin or anthrax, or it could have a bomb, right? So what would you do? Do you just hand him the mail that comes in? So here's the paradigm that people use is they take the mail, they take the letter, they take a photocopy, they give the president the photocopy, and they burn the original, right? That's safe. So we took the same paradigm to email, and so in our latest version of our endpoint email gateway, we take any attachment that comes in, and we run it through basically a photocopy machine, right? An equivalent of a photocopy machine that removes all of the potential badness, right? It'll remove Flash, it'll remove JavaScript, and it'll give a visual fidelity of the original document without the threats, right? So that is a new paradigm that we've brought to the space that can fundamentally alter the equation for the companies that deploy this product. And this is the kind of thing that we'd love to see more from academia, bring a new paradigm shift. So I loved all the posters today. I was very impressed by the quantity and diversity. And so it's a little bit intimidating for someone to say, come up with the next great idea, right? But the way you do that is you start by doing a survey of the field. I loved the work by Mohammed Almashekar and SPAF where they were surveying the field of kind of offensive-minded security, right? So when you do a survey like that, that's the best way a survey like that is the best way for you to be able to identify where the gaps are, right? You do something like that, you get the big picture in your mind, and you say, wait a minute, we have no protections against this. What's the next big thing that we can do to fill in this gap? And similarly, there were a lot of posters on the state of security in Finland, the state of security in the Netherlands, the state of security in other countries. These kinds of surveys and just evaluating the state of the art, getting a good feeling for what's out there, this is a great stepping stone. So I really liked seeing that, and I think that's going to be a good stepping stone for groundbreaking work. And another thing is, in the industry, the way the industry is going is a lot of the work is moving to big data analysis. And that's a little bit dispiriting. As a student, I remember, it was dispiriting because I didn't have big data, right? And I didn't even know, there's so much security by obscurity out there. I didn't even know what the state of the art was. I didn't know if I was advancing the state of the art or if this is something I was presenting to, Sandia National Labs or to government agencies, my PhD dissertation work. And I could never really tell if this is something that they'd been doing for 10 years or if it was something that that was brand new to them, and they couldn't really tell me always in the end. So that's one of the reasons that I enjoyed coming to Symantec Research Labs, and I'm more than happy to consult with any of you and give you access. We have a lot of data. We have more security data than anyone. We have programs for sharing this data with academic researchers, and we also so. We're happy to share our data. We're happy to work with you, and also encourage you to pursue the kinds of research that we think will be most promising and help you kind of let you know what the state of the art is for us and what we see out there. And so that's kind of my little piece. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Next, we'll have Mark Brooks from MITRE. Your slides will pop up here in just a sec. There we go.
Okay. Can everyone hear me? Okay, so these are some slides. I'm not going to predict the future, but I will happily talk about what we see as trends from the analytical side. So I'm not talking about as much on the adversaries. So unfortunately, we'll go from there. But one of the things that we talk about a lot in our analysis, and I'll talk about some things that we feel are kind of the way the future is going, and what we find effective in our work is doing this kind of work, is where we try and look at the threat, understand it, and then use that as a way to share with our collaborators and other members of our industrial base and other things, so we can be agile in our defense. So these are some key elements we have in that. And so we have this capability that we use. And I'll talk a bit more about it, but this is kind of the drive-by capability of what we refer to as CRITS. It's our collaborative research, and it's a tool and a platform that was built internally at MITRE to really capture cyber artifacts that we wanted to use for our operational use to protect our enterprise and to protect the work we do. And then we realized it was also very useful for the analysis, and we've really adopted the DevOps model that's gotten a lot of credibility, a lot of interest recently, of where we have hands-on developers working a lot with our analysts and trying to push out new capabilities. And CRITS is one of our bigger successes out of that area. So this is the model of really what we do with CRITS, and I think this is the model that speaks a bit on what was earlier and what we push for, and I think where the future will go as we go forward with this type of collaborative sharing of threats. You have different threat databases potentially within a federation. You work on some standards and protocols and how you share that, like we said earlier today, in an automated fashion, or you work to try and move towards that. And then you have potentially just larger scale threat information that you're using through that. So this is kind of not everyone will do it the same way, and we fully understand it, but this is kind of the way we see cyber defense moving forward, and an effective model that we're going. So, I mean, it was really, like I said, this is kind of the trend that we've seen, is it was built internally. It's used for advanced internal intel analysis. We're trying to manage that share problem where we have analysts working on different things, working with government agencies and other partners. We don't really make products, as given what MITRE is as an FFRDC. So we have this evolving model. We are pushing to try and share it with people of interest that we want to work with on these threats. And we definitely are working with private companies to do that within the DIB and other places. So this is kind of the stack of how we see those automated standards fitting together. STIX was mentioned earlier, so I think folks might be familiar with that. But these are different standards that we're involved in. We're not saying these are the only ones, but these are definitely I'm from MITRE, so I have to have a slide with our standards on it. But there are definitely others that work within this space. But the whole goal of our work for this is to start having these standards evolve and be worked by others, so we can start to all share threats in a coherent way. And I think that echoes a lot of what was said earlier today as well. So, and then that might be all I had for just kind of what we're doing for trend.
And thank you, Mark Brooks. And now we'll hear from Mark Rogers. You had a 50-50 chance.
Yeah, that's right. I'm not going to go get a lottery ticket today either. Flip over. Here we go. All right. Very interesting topic, and I thought I'd play the devil's advocate. Anybody that knows me knows that I kind of like to do that once in a while. So I'm really going to kind of throw the question out there, is APT actually real, or is this just the new boogeyman? We talked about a little bit more of fear and uncertainty and doubt. And if it is real, so what? What does that change? Does it really change anything fundamentally that we've been doing? So the big question is, again, it's a nice acronym. It's thrown out there a lot. It's used as a marketing tool. But so what? Is this really something that changes the landscape for risk? Does it change the landscape for what we really have to do? Okay, a lot of what falls under this rubric of an APT is anything but advanced. A lot of the attacks are not overly advanced. The threats aren't new. It's persistent, but how do you measure the persistent? How long is persistent? Is it more than 1 day? Is it more than 6 months? Is it more than a year? So a lot of these terms, or a lot of these things that we use to classify something as APT are very fuzzy at best. And it's kind of, where does this start and where does this end? And is it really just the natural evolution of what we've been seeing all along? So you start looking at a taxonomy. One of the things that I'm always worried about being a behavioral scientist is we don't fall into the trap of something called a nominal fallacy. We love to label things. Label, label, label. But just because we label something doesn't mean we truly even understand it. So APT is a nice label to attach to something, but so what? Does it improve our understanding of the threat? Does it improve our understanding of who's responsible for this threat? And does it improve our understanding of how to manage the threat? Okay, so how do we classify? Do we classify it by motivation of the attackers, by the target, by the level of damage, by the attack sophistication, by the organization or group affiliation, or even by funding source? Because if you look at the definition, all of these could be used as criteria for defining something as APT. Okay. Are these really just more motivated, more skilled, and more funded attackers? Are they different? Are they significantly different? Is this just the natural evolution of the opportunistic lone attackers? Is this a new term for the militarization of attacks? Is it a new term for corporate espionage? Because I'd argue every one of those examples fits under this definition. And if everything fits under the definition, then what good is it? It really hasn't helped us at the end of the day. So if you look at what the current thinking is in this area, the essential characteristics are motivated by financial gain or competitive advantage. Well, that's not really unique. That's kind of a lot what, lone actors could be doing it. The thing that's probably unique to this is long-term sustained attacks, okay? And usually they're more targeted. So to me, the real difference when we talk about APT is we're talking about non-opportunistic attacks. And to me, that's something that makes sense, because that is a differentiator in a lot of different ways. So when I see APT, I think non-opportunistic. But then again, we can run into some problems as to how do you completely define opportunistic. So what is the threat? Okay, well, again, a lot of the research out there, there's been a slew of reports published. This has gained lots of national media attention. And really, I like this. It's more like a cyber attack campaign than a single type of threat. So that gets you more into that persistent. So non-opportunistic and a campaign of attacks. Okay? But that's problematic then. So if we agree that this is somehow different, then a lot of the things that we've been currently doing to mitigate attacks aren't going to work with this group, and we shouldn't be surprised that they're not working. Okay, so if it's non-opportunistic, if it's highly motivated, and it's a campaign, then the whole concept of the cost of the attack is irrelevant then, because they're not going to follow the same behavioral economics that lone actors or opportunistic or unmotivated actors have. So the whole concept of if we make the cost of the attack so high they're going to go elsewhere, no, they're not. They're just going to double, triple, quadruple their efforts to get at that. Now it becomes, like you were saying, even more of a challenge in some cases. It becomes a game. So we really have to start looking at, if this is real, and if we agree that this is out there and it's somehow different, then why are we using the same type of models to understand this that we are for other type of attacks and threats? Okay? The whole concept of trying to determine how to harden targets is out of step with this group as well, because again, it goes back to a lot of the lone actors, opportunistic. If we make it more expensive or cheaper to go attack somebody else, then they will. So should the APT be treated differently? Probably. But why? We don't really have a lot. We have a lot of discussions about how big the threat is. But if you go and look at some of the surveys out there, nobody's quite sure what the likelihood of an actual true APT, so non-opportunistic, targeted, directed, highly motivated attack is to the average corporation. In some of the research and some of the surveys that have just been published, really only 11% predicted that APT would be any type of concern in the future. So they're saying, yeah, APT is out there, but it's not who we're having to deal with. It's not a big dot on the threat radar. And if you look at this, still 50% of the data breaches are still coming from people from the insider. And a lot of, if you look at the definition that a lot of these models use for APT, well, those insiders would still be more opportunistic than what would be considered to be an APT threat, or APT. I really like this little cartoon by Bart Simpson here. I will not attempt to define advanced persistent threat. And he's being forced to write that out several times. So I just wanted to kind of throw it out there and kind of, I guess, chum the water and say, okay, what is this? Is it real, or is it really just the new boogeyman?
Thank you, Mark. You know, I've noticed we have redefined some terms over and over again these past couple of days. And chum the water was the most recent one. We've heard that before. And now we've just heard it a second time. But APT, you know, Josh Corman called it adaptive persistent adversary. And that was a good way to look at it. We've talked a couple of times about not just figuring out what happened, what the IP address was, what the malware was, but who actually did it and what are they after. Another good paradigm shift. And Ben redefined APT to mean average persistent teenager. That's a new one on me too. So we're going to go through some questions and answers now here. Let's move this out here. And let me ask a couple to get started.
I think we need to respond to Marcus here first. So let me take a stab at it, and I'll let my colleagues
Okay.
do the same. So
You can do that before a question is ever asked. That's
yeah.
prerogative
Well,
of the board.
He threw out a lot of questions, so I'll just treat him as the first questionnaire, I guess. So I agree with a lot of what he said, right? I mean, to a large extent, these APTs, or advanced persistent attackers, it's a throwback to the old heyday of human-driven attackers, right? Before, and one of the things that's really changed is the economics of it. So before, it was just not, there wasn't enough money to be had by going after one specific person, right? And so, but now you have, you know, people weren't monetizing intellectual property the way they are now. And so I think the economics have changed, and so that has kind of changed, moved this back to more human-driven attacks. But you know, Marcus is also right that in some industries, when we talk to customers, they really don't get hit by advanced persistent threats, right? And others are getting hit on a constant daily basis, and they, you know, there's a huge variety in the spectrum. And it's also true that insiders are a major concern. So, you know, it's very I mean, I would definitely not cast it all up to fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right? But
So the answer to your question were yes, yes, no, 7, Parmesan cheese, and
42.
tomorrow at 4.
Yeah.
So what's really interesting, so when we do our red team work, we have a lot of advanced capabilities and almost never need them because it's always something completely basic. I mean, 90+% of the time it's, well, I know you thought it was encrypted, but it's actually not. And so if anybody's on the network anywhere, they can see it, right? And the problem is the defender has to be perfect 100% of the time, 24/7, 365. If someone's watching or they actively searching, they'll find something. You know, it's, oh, look, there's someone put up a new SharePoint site for the upcoming CERIAS symposium, and it doesn't quite have the right permissions on it, right? Things keep changing, so you just keep kind of poking around, and eventually someone will make a mistake. And what's interesting, though, is one of the most important things I've gotten out of being at Sandia is within the first few weeks and months of being there, being with people who, you know, can model the APT. It's not, the tech skills are important, but it's actually the imagination. No, let's practice thinking outside the box. It's like, okay. And then you actually go, wow, I never even thought of that entire class of attack surfaces. And you do that for a little while, and you're like, wow, I'm actually pretty good at this now. Doesn't require, the tech skills. You may have to develop something, right? Go, well, if only I could, get in through the thermostat. Well, you don't have a thermostat in the entry lobby. And it's things like that. They just, you don't even think of, oh, well, what about the control system? Is it wired completely separately, or is it on the corporate LAN? Right. So just the imagination is the important part. And when it's a low-level attack, right? So you can take someone new, and in a few weeks they can actually do those imaginative things that don't require a lot of tech skill. So would they be part of the APT? Depending how you define it, yes, but at the same time, no. So I'll just go back to my original yes, yes, no, 7 Parmesan cheese.
So I guess from my perspective and from what, when I work with a lot of the folks at MITRE, the APT is a kind of real thing for us because of where we are, and there's definitely sectors that get pounded a lot more than others, and we're squarely in one of them that gets the pleasure and benefit of constant observation and interest. So I guess that's the part of the challenge I see is with this disparity then becomes a question of, is there appreciation in a broad enough range to kind of have everyone move the state of the art forward, or is it going to have to be in pockets of interest where this industry cares, this industry doesn't, so then you have to figure out how you collaborate across those people that care, but at the same time don't then leave, because then you also have collaboration. It's not like industries, a lot of them have their own silos, but they do have a lot of connectivity with partners, so if suddenly their partners are not caring, but you are, so I think that's part of the challenge I see as someone from the government side, because it's pretty easy to convince a lot of our folks we interact with about the threat. But as you move towards, a lot of collaborative channels and, public clouds instead of private clouds, then it's a question of, well, you have to trust everyone that has touches your entire supply chain and everything, and that just makes the issue pretty challenging as well.
Thank you. So if you're within 5 years of my age, and I won't tell you exactly what that is, then you've been at work during the whole time that we've been reading about or experiencing various kinds of attacks, from the Morris worm to the I love you virus and all of those kind of things that started in the 90s or 80s and 90s. And then we read more and more about botnets and kind of organized crime sort of approaches to things, where I'm going to take down your website unless you pay me some money, that sort of thing. And then in the last 10 years, we've read stories about the real mean folks who are attacking nations. It's become an information offensive operation. And so on the surface, there seems to be a general trend right there. And it makes you think that, okay, the kids were involved at one point, and then the mafiosos got involved, and then the spies got involved. And maybe the other ones kind of fell out of the game. But my guess is that's not the case. And so I'm wondering, what are those average persistent teenagers doing nowadays? And what are they contributing to all of this? Are they still around? Do they still, should they still worry us?
The answer is yes, they're still around. What they provide is noise in the system, which is exactly what a lot of these, we would, I guess, define now as the APT, or non-opportunistic, or the economic-based attacks, or the organized crime. They use that to their advantage. They want to hide under the radar. They want to look like they're don't worry about it, it's just that teenager doing something. And then all of a sudden, when they're in and the shoe drops, it's been taken over. So a lot of what they provide is the noise, is the coverage, is the camouflage, is the signal-to-noise ratio just gets completely out of whack. So they haven't gone away. They're still there. And in some cases, they've kind of evolved into the loosely organized group where they get together like anonymous, let's say. They get together, like 4chan, they come, they do something, but it's never the same group of the same individuals every single time. So individually they're doing things, they get together for a reason to do something, and then they split back up again. So they haven't gone away, they're not being replaced. None of these groups are being replaced, they're still there. They're just adding layers on top of layers on top of layers.
So rather than having to write their own code, they're also using tools that are out there. And
Right, yeah, yeah. Attacks are getting more sophisticated, but in some cases, if you look at some of the data, the attackers aren't. Just there are a few people running some very cool tools out there, and those people are now more readily making it available for other people to use at their own risk.
So while we're waiting for someone to approach the microphone here with another question, let me get this one out there. This is kind of a standard question that we like to ask of our panels. Given that we have, you've seen all of our research posters that were presented this year. There are a lot of other projects going on. We have a lot of students in the audience. Where would you say, from both a technical perspective and a non-technical perspective, thinking of the social side of things, what are some research topics that we should be thinking about to look into the near future? What should we be worrying about? Is it about finding that attribution? Is it about finding ways to provide incentives to avoid some of these activities?
So I think one of the big areas, at least I've seen a lot of interest, is people now are really wondering about the mobile platforms. We all have these little devices we like to walk around with and put a lot of very pertinent, relevant, private information into them. And the exploitability of those, and especially we see a growing trend of this BYOD trend of we want to let them get into parts of our enterprise, so then they'll become a richer and richer target for these APTs and non-opportunistic, as Mark was saying. So I think that's a big area that we see a lot of interest from our research side is what's the right way you secure the mobile platforms? How do you understand? And is there ways to kind of keep the private information private when you're dealing with these sorts of different?
So a couple of things that I thought were very interesting. One of the themes that I've seen with companies is the companies that are in a good position are the ones that know where their sensitive data is, right? So, and they know that they've got it protected, right? So, so as Ben was mentioning, right, if you think your data files are encrypted and they're not, you're in trouble, right? But in most cases, people have no idea, most companies have no idea what their sensitive data is, how much of it there is. Basically, they get breached. Then they look at that machine to see what data was on the machine. And based on that, they alert their customers that are, whose information was probably accessed off of that machine. Right? That's not the right way to go about it. It's always a catch-up game, and they're getting breached constantly, and there's no prevention going on. So if you know where it is, then you can design protections around it and design policies around how to protect the data. So there's a field around that called data governance, data loss prevention. There's and it's an important field. Another thing that I saw, there's a lot of research here going on in phishing, for example, and the industry's worked for a long time on detection, right? It's going to be hard to outspend the industry on detecting malware and on detecting phishing emails and those things. But there are a lot of interesting questions around phishing, like attribution, right? So I was talking to Lauren Stewart and trying to persuade her to look into to attribution of phishing emails, right? So can you detect Chinglish versus Spanglish versus Runglish? I don't know how you'd say Russian English, but these sorts of things are interesting questions, right? So can you look at unsolved problems in these areas, and because attribution is a key component of being prepared for the next step.
So I guess from the two ends of the spectrum, at one end we have web programming and anything web, because we have frameworks built on top of frameworks, built on top of systems, built on top of everything else. There's, even a basic web app, if you even just look what's going on, it's like, wow, CNN main page loads things from 75 different web addresses. Why? So all that complexity is going on, and pretty much it's all abstracted away. You can't tell what's going on anymore. Once upon a time, you would open a socket, and then you would say, send these bytes, get these bytes back, and let's go. Now it's, you take the data, you throw it through some PHP, some JavaScript, throw it down to a framework, that moves it to another module, that dumps it down to some sort of internet thing where magic happens. So all that complexity is ugly. And then, of course, we'll just throw that on a cloud platform just to make it, much more solid. But sort of at the other end of the spectrum, we also have, embedded systems, right? We have the rise of the Arduino and the Raspberry Pi, where, $30 you can get a fully functional computer, and we're putting those embedded devices in everything and everywhere. As was mentioned yesterday, coming here, you probably touched 20 different operating systems. What's in your car? How do you pull, if you're doing an investigation, how do you pull forensic data off of a Raspberry Pi, or how do you pull it out of your car? Right? All these things we don't know, right? So there's a strange car accident, or Toyota's accelerating out of control. Did something happen? We don't know. We don't even know how to pull the data. Or pacemakers. How do you acquire a forensic image from a pacemaker? So embedded, just those sorts of things, and just the ugly complexity that is the cloud and the web, and everything in between.
One of the kind of new emerging areas is adversarial predictive modeling. That's kind of now, it sounds like a catchphrase, but if you think about it, detection is nice, but it shouldn't be the endpoint of what we're looking at. And we're starting to look at moving away from just detection models to starting to be able to predict. So, detecting zero-day exploits is good, but what about sub-zero-day exploits, if there's such a thing? Looking at the weather out here, we probably have those here. But you have to start looking at now is getting away from, we're pretty good at predicting what happened in the past. We're horrible at predicting what's coming down the pipe. So there's a lot of research. It's kind of the holy grail. If you look at where, I know some of the national labs are looking at this, if you look at some of the international think tanks, this whole idea of predicting what's coming in 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, what should we be preparing for future-wise? So the whole concept of adversarial modeling is really starting to catch up, and you're seeing some pretty sophisticated models now with the horsepower we have with our computing systems and the big data to start looking at making this a feasible research area.
Yeah, I mean, I would just kind of more broadly, I would advocate, we need new paradigms. We need, people to take new approaches to things. The whole area of offensive-minded security is underexplored, and I think that's a good area to look into. But always, and especially if you're looking into research in a more established field, you should be talking to us in the industry, right? Get a better sense of what the real problems are. Instead of trying to come up with synthetic data sets, maybe we can, help you. Maybe we can run your experiments on our data. There are opportunities out there and a lot of the things is, when you have these conversations, all of a sudden there's these wealth of problems that start coming up, right? So, and it's just fertile ground for coming up with new ideas and new solutions.
So yesterday, Josh Corman mentioned the importance of interdisciplinary studies. Can you talk to what that means for the future of threat modeling and the work that you are doing in your organizations?
Sure, I'll go first. So one of the things we're doing, I'm working with Kevin Nauer on our recoil force lab. And right now we have a couple internal R&D projects looking at, we're working with our cognitive scientists to see what makes an expert cyber defender an expert. So, how is it that one person can sit down with a spreadsheet with 2 million rows of something, just start scrolling down, stop at row 22,408 and go, oh, that's the one. That's what I'm looking for. And, so we're bringing cognitive. We actually have looked at someone who does like economic game theory. So we're trying to bring in a lot of more cognitive science into the, cybersecurity realm. So that's one example, I guess.
I mean, I guess I would just echo that. A lot of the work that we've done and our research we might have published, we try and engage with cognitive folks a lot. That tends to be the most overlap we either see with cost modeling with the economic folks or the idea of modeling based off of psychosocial behavior indicators. So, I mean, that's where kind of the research tends to lead itself, at least that I've been involved in and see. So I'm sure there are other avenues, but those are really the ones that we tend to leverage more.
You're actually seeing a lot of the more traditional, if you're talking about cybercrime, you're seeing a lot of the criminal justice programs now are looking at combining their programs, their research with computer science, with engineering, and looking at it from an extension of a kind of a criminological model to criminology versus computer science and math. So it's the natural progression. If you look at how are we going to respond to this, how are we going to keep ahead of it, or even catch up to it, how are we going to stay current, then you have to include all the disciplines. It's a very multidisciplinary problem. I think we fell into a trap early on that it was going to be a technology problem. All we needed was to find a better firewall or a better algorithm, and we were going to fix it. And we're starting to realize that it's necessary, but it's not sufficient, that there are other things that come into play. We talk about it's people, it's a person, it's the adversary. You've got motivations, you've got a bunch of different diverse fields out there that have been studying pieces of this, and to have those models now flow in and say, well, we've been doing that in CRM for 10 years. What do you mean you're just thinking of doing that for forensics, or that cognitive model or that economic behavioral model? Well, we got rid of that 15 years ago. You shouldn't be using that as a standard for that next model that you're coming out with. So it is really what you're seeing out there. You're starting to see the funding agencies talking about overlaps. You're starting to see them asking and funding projects now where you have behavioral scientists and social scientists and computer scientists working together. And it's kind of a good indication when the federal government starts looking at funding projects that have those folks, that's going to start driving a lot more of the research into that area, because unfortunately we have to follow the money.
Actually, one other area I'll point out is education. So we also have a program that we're working with K-12 and 4-year, 6-year universities, because when someone comes out of a 4-year university, if they have a bachelor's degree, but if it hasn't kind of addressed the cybersecurity mindset, it's in a way it's really too late. And also, if you think, well, we need to teach kids who are 10, don't share your passwords. All those basic things, which I know everyone's studied to death, but more than just protecting themselves while they're on the internet, we also want to go, okay, how early can we go to start training that next generation of cyber defender? Yeah, I use cyber. It's okay, I've written a science fiction novel, I'm allowed to use cyber. So that's another thing, is how do we get the training done? So even if you're a professional, how do we manage to go, you don't have weeks and months to take training, right? The bad guys, if they go, hey, I need to learn this new technology, they sit down and learn it until they're like, okay, now I have my malware, my payload, my technique, whatever. But the good guys are like, I've got 20 servers that are melting down right now. I've got to go. So how do we try to get that training to go, here's what you need to know, here's hopefully not as fast as we can get it to you, but how do we make sure we have quality education so we can get you the training you need to properly defend yourself?
I'm going to put a plug in for CERIAS. That's why CERIAS has been so successful. That's one of the reasons, is because from day one, staff has realized that it's interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary. That is the approach. That is how we're going to come up with, I think, some meaningful solutions to the problems.
Yeah, really good things happen when you bring someone that has a totally different mindset to a problem that's been addressed by only computer scientists in the past, right? So natural language processing, statistics, people on the hardware supply chain, there's more threats there now. People in policy, all of these areas, they bring a different slant, right? And there's some new interesting problems that are underserved that we're not getting, adequate, that computer scientists aren't that well equipped to address. So for example, how do you detect a malicious insider, right? It's a different paradigm, right? You're not classifying anymore, you're looking for the outliers. And so now you need, someone that's got a statistics background, probably better equipped to help you with that. So.
We should chat after.
I want to follow that up with a comment, because it's kind of a nice segue into something that I've been speaking about recently. Diversity of discipline is extremely valuable, and we've been living that here for a while. But another thing that those of us working in the field have to be aware of is we have to promote diversity of individuals. We do not have enough women in the field. We don't have enough people from traditional minorities who are involved in the field. There are various circumstances that tend to keep some of them out, discourage them, both as students and as employees. And this is something we need to pay more conscious attention to because that diversity of view that they bring also adds to the solution space of what we do. And I think everybody probably agrees with that, or at least I hope they do, but it's something that day to day we don't tend to notice. So it's worth reminding people of that yet again.
Yep, totally agree.
Yeah, it's a big mystery. Like, where are the women in computer science, right? I mean, in the 70s, I've heard that it was pretty 50-50. And here now, I'm sorry, there are women here, but like, but it's, it's maybe 10 or 20%, which is surprising. Okay. Okay. It's not, it's better.
We've
so-
actually had a bit of an anomaly within our digital forensics area. Our actual percentage is 60% of the we're women.
How'd
We're still trying to figure that out. We're working on it. We're actually looking at asking those questions because it's right off the chart as you look at percentages across the traditional technology and computer science disciplines.
Well, what I heard that was great is, so actually we just received funding from the Department of Energy and NSA to do a minority serving institution work with the historically black colleges and universities. So what I just heard Spaff say was he wanted to help us with that. That was great.
Definitely. I heard that too.
Okay, yeah, so it's great. So we actually managed to get a line item in the federal budget. There's a nice page and a half write-up that talks about, if we're going to find the subject matter experts we need in cybersecurity and STEM, we have to start looking to the minorities. And one interesting statistic we found when we were looking at this a few months ago is, so in general, 12% of the degrees issued are in the information sciences. For African Americans, that is 1%. And so we went and found some of our African American colleagues and said, is there, what's going on here? And basically, what they said was, well, culturally, we are pushed to become doctors and lawyers, right? So if you're a professional, if you do get good grades, your family and your community says, you should totally be a doctor or a lawyer. So if you look at the ratio in those fields, they're above, the average they should have for their, percentage of the population. But now you get to computing science, and it's 1% instead of 12%. So that's one of the things we need to address. We need to go, hey, this is really cool too. You get to do great things, save the world every now and then. So, but yeah, that was great. Thanks for volunteering yourself to work with us, Beth.
We have about 10 minutes left, so who else would have a topic of discussion to bring up to direct our panel, or perhaps stump the panel?
So the topic of the panel is more on trends and predicting the future, and we've talked a little bit about diversity in programs, which is very interesting. But what about diversity in attackers? We have these APTs, or if we want to define them that way. What trends, what changes do we see or foresee coming down the road that's going to make our job even more challenging?
Okay. So I think the thing we're seeing is, the attack industry is still relatively new, but it is very profitable apparently. Yeah. So I think we can expect to see larger, better funded, more organized groups. I think we'll start to see more specialization, although we already see that now. But right now, companies will hire other companies to be their specialists, right? Oh, hey, we need new firewall, so let's hire this value-added reseller who will come in and do everything for us. So I think we'll see more specialization from the adversaries. I think we'll see more organization. But at the same time, I think we'll also see a thinning out of the most advanced attackers. As I mentioned previously, working with our red team, it is ridiculously hard and time intensive to be at the top of your game. And the more new technology comes out, Windows 8 came out. That, if anyone's used it, I don't know if anyone's actually used Windows 8, but there's enough changes. That's a significant weeks to months of effort to learn the new nuances, start looking at things, let alone a new web framework or anything else. So I think there is sort of going to be a leveling off, right? So obviously a nation state will be able to maintain different teams that will have those capabilities, but I think sort of the crowd will sort of reach a peak and then kind of flatten out in their capability just because it takes too much time.
So I guess I'm not sure that I would agree with that, given the fact that what it seems like we see is just like a commoditization of baseline capability. So you might see a thinning out initially as you have this learning curve, but then it becomes baseline capability. Metasploit gets patched. It can hit Windows 8 now, and then so I guess I think there's a tension there, and I'm not saying. And at some point, it's kind of the pendulum swings back and forth. So I think that'll happen over time as we see a thin with new capability, but then before that next new capability comes out, I think you'll see kind of the crowd can jump onto it because the tools get commoditized enough. So not to disagree that there is that thing, but
yeah, the catch is going to be the people who can write the modules for Windows 8
Yeah.
are going to become fewer and fewer, just because as ideally as new products come out, there's a short period when they come out that yes, there's a lot of patches to be done and they need to solidify things as they get out there. But in general, as new things come out, they're better. In general, but again, it's just it is a lot of work. Right? I mean, it used to be, buffer overflows were easy. You could, learn how to do one in 20 minutes. Now, you need to get through 8 papers on, roppery so you can actually get something to work. So it is getting harder. I'm not saying, again, Metasploit, yes, it's advancing quickly, and if you can't keep up with Metasploit, you're in trouble. But where you get to the, really targeted, really serious, I'm going to get you at any cost attack. I can go buy a 0-day if I have to, kind of level. I think we are going to see that, real world-class attackers, there's not that many. Just like, the world-class defenders are also few and far between.
I think you're also seeing, and this is something that Keith's question I think brings up, is you're seeing the diversity and the multidisciplinary type of approach we're looking at from a defense side. They're already doing it on the attack side. You've got folks that are traditionally, fine arts, musicians. They're involved in this now, where that they didn't used to be in the past. It used to be pretty much we could kind of get our head wrapped around. There's a techie, geeky kid that was doing that. We kind of could understand him because we were kind of like that too. But the whole model of who the attackers are is changed. Now they're coming at it from an artistic, from you're mentioning about being very imagination, thinking outside of the box. And so when we're talking about how we have to be more diverse and more inter and multidisciplinary, that's already happening on the attacker side. And we're seeing it. We're seeing more women now being involved in some of these that we didn't see before. When we're seeing folks that don't have the traditional computer science or information technology, more of the liberal arts or the fine arts or some of these other, and they're looking at problems and they're looking at ways and attack vectors that those of us that are a little bit more rigid in the IT or information sciences don't even imagine ways of we could attack that. So that's a big shift that we really have to get our head wrapped around.
So I had a question. George Kurtz had a really good chart, I thought, when he talked about demonetizing attacks like these that had all the multiple steps and stages you need to exfil data and have command and control and all the processes you needed. And in his chart, by attacking not just what a company or an entity can do to prevent malware coming on their boxes is one place to attack back, but to take down as much of that infrastructure behind it, because that's all expensive too, right? What's the current state of the art now if you're a company that maybe you have your FBI agent that you've adopted, maybe you don't. How do you get to that back end and start to take it down as anything beyond that kind of coordination or a community? Or is that the only way to do it?
So some of the, I kind of some of the state of the art is always kind of a challenge because but what we're some of the tools that we've seen be effective and we've kind of worked with the community to release are this idea to get into that command and control channel. So I mean, we have a tool called Chop Shop that is effectively a dissector that we release modules that say, if you know your adversaries are using these types of rats, here's the capability to kind of pop open the box and see what are they doing, where are they going, and effectively get perspective on what they're doing for their TTP. So I think the state of the art tends to be how do you find those different parts of their attack, kill chain, and other things, and pop them open and kind of shine them in the light, and look at them in the light. And I think that is a pretty nice advance, and I think we should keep doing things like that. You know, understanding how they're going to go out and what are the commands they're running. You know, not many people use net use, so if you start seeing someone do it a lot, maybe that's a compromised machine. I mean, those sorts of things, when you see what they're actually doing, are really helpful to kind of see if they're past the spearfish and they're actually running around internally. So I think that's effective.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and one of the things that's interesting is when you look at the very sophisticated attacker groups, there aren't that many of them out there, and you can sort of ID them by the tools that they use, right? And I always thought of the attacker pool as kind of infinite, but it's not, right? Like, and as it gets harder, the number of groups that are have that technical sophistication will probably continue to decline. But they're not going to go away, right? And as you think about a holistic approach, right, to defense, it's not even all about computer science, right, or about computers at all, right? So you're already seeing this where attackers use people that are boots on the ground in the company and they coerce them. They get some dirt on them and then they coerce them into cooperating with them. And so there are all sorts of different vectors. And and it's very important to know, for example, going back to data governance, you need to know where your data is, and many times it's not in your company, right? So I write a patent, I send it out to lawyers in a third-party firm, they have my data, and now they get breached, and now I lost my IP, right? That happens a lot, and so there are a lot of the attack surface is broader, and as it gets harder to attack in one area, so Windows 8 is a huge advance, right? iOS is very hard to hack, and so as we get better in this area, we're going to have to start worrying about different kinds of attacks.
So I would say instead of adopting an FBI agent, you could adopt a Navy SEAL and let them handle the problem for you. One of the biggest things that's going to hamper us is, for example, if you operate out of Russia, your chances of being held legally responsible for your attacks is effectively zero. So until we have those international agreements in place with countries that are willing to actually enforce those instead of just signing it and saying, yeah, we signed it, we have no intention of enforcing it, as long as someone can attack with impunity, they're going to keep doing it. The other side of the coin is, so we could block them. If we find Russia's not playing fair, we could cut Russia off from the internet, or but the problem is we feel that the internet is a great resource and everyone should have access to it. So do we cut off Moscow because of a few hundred people misusing it? We've looked at that and said that's not what we want to do. So until we have those agreements in place, until we actually leverage international partners, they're going to continue operating with impunity, and that's just going to be the way it is. If there's a command and control server in Costa Rica, there's not a lot we can do about it. I mean, yeah, there are things we can do about it, but effectively sending someone to that location, arresting someone, and maybe shooting the box, we're going to see it keep going on.
Thank you. This brings us to the end of our time, so let's thank our panel for their SPAP's going to make a few closing remarks here, but could I impose upon you to stay here in case there are people who would like to come up and address you with some questions afterwards. Thank you. Thank you again.
You probably don't have to stay past 6 or 7. So this brings us to the close of our program. Thank you all for being here. Before we go, I do have one item I want to cover, and unfortunately we have a far sparser audience here than should be present. These events don't just happen. They take a tremendous amount of planning and effort, and I'm really fortunate to have such a wonderful group of people working with me on a regular basis to make that happen. And so I'd like to recognize the principals, the main CERIAS staff who work on this, Randy Bond, Joel Rasmus, Mike Vicozzi on camera, Adam Hammer on drums, Marlene Walls, Lori Floyd. Those 6 people have done just a tremendous job pulling all this together and helping all year round. So please join me in thanking them. They've also recruited a number of student helpers, not all of whom are here. In fact, I'm not sure all of who the student helpers were this time around. I know Kelly's here in front, Lauren's there in the back. There were a few others. Thank you to all of you for your help as well. That's helped fill in. We are going to have another one of these next year if all things work out. And do we have a date picked for that yet? April 7 and 8. So you can mark your calendars now. If you have... Yeah, check back because sometimes the university preempts us on space. If there are some particular topics that you think would be good for next year, or particular speakers that you might like to hear, we are open to suggestions at any time. For those of you who are new to CERIAS, we have a lot of information that's out on our website that's available for free. I particularly would like to point you to our seminar series. Every Wednesday we have speakers on various technical topics. We record those and make them available for download later on. We currently have over 500 videoed talks that are available online through the website. We have an equally large library of technical documents, software, and other information. And there are a number of benefits to being involved with CERIAS if you're at Purdue or if you're not. We'd certainly like to talk to you about that. But for now, thank you once again for being here. Enjoy the rest of this beautiful spring weather here in Indiana. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.